I'm so excited to be here with Ashton Keefe, who's come up with these recipes to pair with our wines, and to have her lead us through the cooking process.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, everybody. I know I will get to see many of you in person over the next year. I'm excited to be with you for our first digital event. This is gonna be a really fun class. It's my first time doing an interactive event with Steve too. So I am sure I will learn a massive amount, and just excited to be here and share with these recipes, share with you guys these recipes that we created for these really wonderful wines, the inspiration behind doing them. These were our February recipes. So they're obviously a little bit cozier. They're a little bit more comfort food level than, you know, say something we would create in the spring or in the fall. So that's also really nice too, because I think that there's something really welcoming around comfort food in particular. So yeah, so we have two recipes for you tonight. We're gonna do the winter white fondue, and I love this. I'm a chef by trade. I'm based in New York. I'm a chef and I'm a food stylist. And I have been in hospitality for about 15 years. My mother was a chef, and my father's family dabbled in wine as well. So I've kind of grown up in this crazy circus of a industry. And the winter white fondue, just to introduce this recipe, which we're going to start on first, I really love it because it really speaks to the eye as much as it does to the palate. I think that you visually eat things as well. And so having this really monochromatic plate is visually appealing, and obviously it's paired really well with our Chardonnay, and Steve will speak to that as well. And we use it in the recipe too. So that's something that I always love, when a wine can kind of complement both your palate when you're drinking, but also when you're eating. And then the second recipe that we're gonna do is a fried goat cheese ball, because there's nothing bad about that at all. And I also think it's a recipe that can be made ahead and frozen, so that if you are entertaining, you just pop it in the oven from the freezer, and it's really, really easy to eat, and it looks fancy while not being very hard at all. So that's what we're gonna walk you through tonight. And I know you guys have got your wines open. I'm gonna let Steve just do a little bit of a taste for this. We'll cheers with the Chardonnay. He'll do a little tasting notes in this while I kind of chop shallots and whatnot, and then we'll go into the recipe.
All right, thank you, Ashton. Yes, so tonight we're starting off with our 2020 Cortina Chardonnay. And the Cortina is a wine we've been making for about 4 years now. And it's really, it owes itself to this peculiar part of the vineyard where an old stream bed that ran underneath the vineyard deposited some Cortina soils, which are sort of alluvial soils. And this is a very unusual thing to have in Carneros. We typically just have what we consider very classic Carneros clay soils, which really, do a great job of limiting the vigor of the vines and really concentrating the fruit. But we have this area where this old stream bed used to tie into Carneros Creek, which is on the eastern edge of our property. And I decided to plant some Dijon clone down there and see how it would ripen as an earlier ripening selection in the coldest part of the vineyard. And it's always made this sort of very floral, beautiful Chardonnay that's a little bit more opulent than some of the other selections on the property, but it always has this great, what I call a white floral element or acacia blossom element. And then it picks up some of those classic stone fruit characteristics that we get here in Carneros. So started bottling this on its own a few years ago, in the 2020, I think is an excellent example of what we've done with this. And then of course, this wine does go through some malolactic fermentation. It varies how much every year. This year, I only put it through about 20%, but that's going to give it some of that kind of brioche and vanilla and some of those kind of creamy notes you get from a malolactic fermentation, which I think are going to complement this fondue dish really beautifully.
Yeah, so what you guys are just seeing me do while you're tasting that and kind of allowing that to kind of open up and enjoy it. I just chopped up one shallot. I've got about a tablespoon of olive oil in a pan. I'm doing this in a shallow Dutch oven. This is probably not what you would do it in at home. You would probably do it in something a little bit more high-sided like this, because it's going to be a fondue. But I really want you guys to be able to see the process as much as you can. So I'm using something that's got a little bit of a larger diameter for it. So I'm just sauteing my shallot in there and letting that kind of cook down a little bit. And then I've got cornstarch and vinegar. So these are going to kind of help prevent my cheese and my fondue from separating. We essentially want to create a little bit of an emulsion. So in order to kind of help us do that, we're going to use a little cornstarch. So while this kind of wilts down, I'll kind of grab this and see, is anybody cooking with me tonight, by the way, just so that I can make sure that everybody's not, you know, going to burn their house down and going to enjoy it. If you're not, don't worry about it. Just drink as much wine as you want. But if you are cooking, maybe limit yourself to that one glass.
Taking mental notes. Yeah. So one of the things I do get asked a lot about food and wine pairings, and I'm not a professional chef. I'm obviously a winemaker. So I always think of food pairings in two veins. Either they could be complementary, where you know the fruit flavors and the texture of the wine are going to complement or be similar to the dish that you're about to enjoy, or they can be contrasting, which means they might have high acidity that's going to cut through some dish that's very fatty, and the acid's going to work in this really you know, beautiful way in kind of drawing out the flavors and really, you know, making the flavors kind of last on your palate. So sometimes you think of wines that wouldn't necessarily go with the dish, but maybe that's because the chef wants them to contrast with the food rather than to complement the food. And in other cases, you really want that kind of walking hand in hand kind of complementary flavors. So I'm curious how Ashton feels about this wine blending with her dish.
Absolutely. I also really, one of the things that I noticed as I was tasting through this and thinking about the food itself is that, again, like you said, it's a story. So I found that this wine was incredibly elegant. It's sophisticated. I love the floral notes on it. And I also loved how that kind of played with some of the elements that we pair the fondue with. So we have fennel in here. We have some spicy radishes. We have some cauliflower. So I just thought that this really like looked and felt the same way that this did. I think there's multiple parts. The acid kind of cuts the fat into in the cheese as well. But then when you were talking about the fermentation process, that also kind of marries a little bit with the cheese itself. So I think it might be both for this, believe it or not.
Yes, I think you get some of that, exactly, because the acidity is going to help with the cheese, but having that malolactic is going to, you know, support that creaminess of the cheese as well.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add about a cup of this into the dish. And it's just going to allow it to reduce a little bit. I'm not going to add a ton. But I just want to do enough, and I'm going to let it kind of reduce by about half. And this is going to be the base and the start of our fondue. And just when it starts to kind of simmer around the edges, I have gone ahead, and this is actually a really great way, I think, a lot of times to use up cheese that you might have in your house. I know that sometimes you'll like have half a block of brie that's left, or some cheddar. And I like the marriage of multiple different types of cheeses. I think that it creates a complexity in the fondue that's really interesting. So for this, I'm using a combination of white cheddar, brie, and Parmesan. And I wanted to keep those all, again, monochromatic, because the same thing with the vegetables. I really liked that visually. And I've gone ahead and grated them. You can absolutely cube these. They're just going to take a little bit longer to melt. I mean, it's not anything that's too taxing, but I just went ahead and grated this. I'm using about a pound of cheese. And like I said, I like that combination. You've got the salt from the Parmesan. You've got the, you know, you've got the cheddar, which is like a nice sharpness to it. And then obviously a brie or a triple cream cheese is going to have that like unctuousness. So it kind of has these points that you're hitting throughout the tasting notes of it, the cheese itself. But honestly, use what feels right to you. I just tend to like these three cheeses together. So I'm just going to dump these in here and kind of just give those a stir.
This looks perfect. I think you're going to need 2 bottles of Chardonnay, though, one to cook with and one to drink with.
I know that's one of those things. Maybe you don't use this because you want to enjoy it, but you know, I know it's always a sacrifice. And in culinary school, this was a long time ago. We used to call, whenever you did something like this, it's like a French term for actually usually when you're making pastry, and you're lightening a cake, like a traditional French cake where you don't use any active leaveners. You use, or chemical leaveners, I should say, you're using only eggs. And we would call it the sacrifice whenever you had to like take a little bit of that egg white to like lighten things. So this is your sacrifice for your fondue.
There you go.
Yeah. So just give this a nice little mix. And there's an old, like, again, this is a superstition, but they say to actually, when you're cooking your fondue, you're supposed to stir it in a figure 8. Again, that doesn't mean anything, but it's just like a fun little thing. Anytime I'm stirring fondue, I think about. So you guys will see this comes together very, very, very quickly. And I'm actually going to remove it from the heat because, like I said, I don't want it to separate. I don't want that emulsion. I don't want the cheese to start to separate. So I actually don't want it to get to a boil. I don't even really want it to get to a simmer. You guys will see that took all of 30 seconds. And then I'll grab this just so you can see. I'll put it on my board just so you can kind of see the consistency of what we're looking for. So you guys will see it's all this like amazing cheesy goodness, and it's stringy and it's beautiful. It's still very shiny. So that's what you're looking for as well. You guys can just kind of see what that looks like. And it's obviously got a little bit of the shallots that are in there. And I like the rustic look of that. Sometimes you can mince your shallots very, very fine and they can kind of almost dissolve, but I like seeing them in there. And I'll just show you. I also went ahead and this is my monochromatic white board. And so like I use a little bit of, so I like to use a little bit of endive so you can just kind of dip it in and kind of get a little bit of the cheese and the endive. We've got some cauliflower, we've got some fennel, which I think is really beautiful, very fragrant. And then I have some nice olive bread here. So, but again, use what you like. I just always like to kind of see it. I think that it adds that like extra little special touch. And again, obviously it is kind of in line with the wine as well in terms of like aesthetics.
And I think it looks beautiful with the description of these white fruits I always come up with the wine, you know, the apricot, the white peach, these really lovely stone fruit characteristics. Really fits in with your monochromatic board.
I know, I love it. Visually with your eyes. Do you guys have any questions about the pairing or this recipe? I know that it's kind of just a fun party activity. It's great for, obviously we're past Valentine's Day, but it's great for like a date night. It's great for kids even. Kids like love to dip. I've never met a kid that doesn't love bread and cheese. Yeah, you guys can feel free to drop stuff in the chat or just reach out and jump off mute if you have any questions throughout. Just let us know. But that's our winter white fondue with our beautiful Chardonnay.
Looks beautiful.
Are you going to go down the ingredients for the recipe or post them on the website or what?
I think you're still on mute.
Oh no, we heard you.
No, we can hear you.
So the recipes are available. We'll make sure that you get them. But I can definitely go through the ingredients. We started with olive oil. We just put about a tablespoon or 2 of olive oil in the bottom of our pan. And then we used 1 shallot and I sliced that up and until it was nice and translucent. And then I added a tablespoon of each of apple cider vinegar and cornstarch. And this was what's really going to help create that emulsion and prevent the cheese from breaking once it melts. And then I added 3 cheeses. And so these can be 3 white cheeses of your choice. I happen to use Parmesan, cheddar, and a brie tonight. And then I literally just put them in and they melted within, you saw that, about a minute. And I paired it with a little bit of olive bread, fennel, cauliflower, and what was endive, some beautiful endive.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. How is everybody liking the wine?
Delicious.
Yeah, I think it's really, really well. And such an interesting vintage, 2020. These are kind of the first wines that are, from our tier wines that are coming out now and have had some time to age. And we've had the 21 vintage, so it's given me a chance to reflect on what happened in 2020. And one of the interesting things was a very warm winter, just like we've sort of been experiencing this year, and leading into a little bit of an early bud break, and then this kind of roller coaster year throughout. So the vines here are just starting to wake up. We're maybe about 1% bud break, not quite. And we've got a bit of cold weather here, so we're just crossing our fingers to get through that. and then we'll be off and running with the 2022 vintage.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned, I know that you've talked about, Steve, is that the 2020 vintage created these really, really distinct, beautiful wines. They were almost like just so intense in what they were. And I think that that's really interesting too. And I definitely noticed it, that it was like such a beautiful harvest for these two wines in particular.
Well, yeah, usually when we have a vintage where the yields are quite low, that happens. There's this innate concentration with the fruit. And 2015 was really, really small vintage. And then 2020 was probably the smallest since the 2015. I think it shows in these wines. They have some real richness to them and some what we would kind of call extract, which is the sense of innate concentration that's in the wine, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad you guys are all enjoying it. It's definitely been one of my favorites. So I'm excited to taste it with you guys. Wine's always better with people. So it's awesome. So if you guys were here and having food with me, you'd all be eating the fondue. So just mentally be eating the fondue while you're drinking the rest of your glass of wine while I make the next dish. But if you guys have any questions on either the wine or that last recipe and they just, you know, come to you in about 5 minutes, again, feel free to ask questions. And we're here for your at your disposal. So we're gonna get started on the goat cheese balls. Again, very simple. You see the last one took me all of about 10 minutes to make. I try to do the same thing with all of these recipes. I want you to be in the kitchen enjoying a bottle of wine with people that you love or yourself or good music or whatever that is. So I try to create these recipes to be, yes, elegant and sophisticated and you know, up to par with these beautiful wines, but I want them to be enjoyed. I don't want you to be stuck in the kitchen making them. So this is another great example of this. And I've got about a pound of goat cheese that I've just popped into a bowl like this. And this is just 2 of those logs. So 2 of those little logs that you can pick up, just grab those. It's a great kind of like round number, a half a pound. And I leave them on the counter when I get home. So I went, you know, obviously to the market this afternoon, and I just leave them on the counter because I want this to be very, very soft so that I can ball them. And so this is actually an opportunity where you can use whatever kind of flavors that you like. And this can change with the season and obviously what you're drinking. But for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this. And I'm going to add a little bit of red pepper flakes. And one thing that I'll just say now, because I didn't mention it before when I was making the fondue, but I didn't add any salt to the fondue. And you can certainly do that. You guys saw me taste it. It was plenty salty. The cheese was totally fine. So I didn't need to, but that's just something, as you guys saw me season this, you probably might have noticed that I didn't do that for the fondue. So that might be something that changes based on what cheeses you're using. So just keep that in mind, that wasn't a misstep. Okay, cool. And so I've got a little bit of red pepper flakes in there. I think that adds like a nice little heat that I appreciate. And I'm going to use some thyme. Thyme is an herb that I love, you know, to drink. You know, it's great with red or white. I think it's one of the most versatile herbs. It's a woodsy herb. So it's one of those herbs that can be roasted for hours and hours with like a big piece of meat, but it's also, the leaves are very, very soft, so they can be eaten raw as well. And there's very few herbs that can do that as gracefully. So I'm going to do about, I believe in this recipe, it's a little bit more, I think it's a teaspoon I throw in here. But the thing about this is that it really can be dealer's choice. So I'm just going to take the leaves off my thyme. And to do that, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm sure you all know how to do this, but you just hold your thyme at the top, just like this. And then I take my hand and I just go straight down. You guys will see they'll drop into my palm. So I'll do that for this little bunch that I've got here. It's also a relatively easy herb to grow for people who don't have green thumbs. It's pretty hardy. So if you do have an herb garden, feel free to throw it in there because it's not like mint. It won't take over things, but it'll grow and give you a nice yield for very little you know, gardening.
Oh, well, Ashton is chopping up some vegetables there. We have a chef visiting us here at our guest house. His name is Dylan Ariazza, and he made Ashton's fondue,
Ooh.
paired it with this olive bread with a little bit of sage and some white vegetables. So you can see a little bit of radish and cauliflower there. So this is just a gorgeous dish, and I'm gonna get to enjoy it.
Yum. Good, good. Dig in.
Dig in.
You guys will see I just added my thyme just like that. I'm just gonna give this a mix. Just kind of give it a nice mix. Nothing crazy here. Okay, I've got that all kind of mixed together. And then I have my breading station. So you guys, anybody who's ever made a chicken parm, an eggplant parm, what else do you bread? I mean, you can bread anything, if you're Italian especially. But what we have here, and this is just really simple, we've got flour, egg, and breadcrumbs. So I'll kind of make room here so that you guys can see what all this looks like. We've got flour, egg, and breadcrumb. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna dip everything from the flour to the egg to the breadcrumb, just like that. And this recipe makes about a dozen balls. And I like to keep these just a little bit smaller than a golf ball. You want them to be bite-sized. You want them to be easy for people to eat. Let me grab a spoon really quickly to show you guys how to do this. But I'll show you guys how to do one, and then we're gonna walk through the Pinot, but this is a very, very simple process. I like to season each one of these with salt because you don't wanna lose the seasoning. You don't wanna rinse the seasoning off. So say, you know, you've seasoned this big, beautiful goat cheese, compound cheese that you just created, and I'm gonna ball it up. I don't wanna miss all of that seasoning and just kind of have it fall off when it goes right into the egg. So I wanna season each one of these, just give them kind of like a nice little mix. There's not a specific amount that you need of flour, breadcrumbs, or eggs. That's a question I get asked a lot. You know, how much eggs do I need? How many eggs do I need? You honestly, just until you've got a good amount, you can bread it all. So this is about a cup. Again, I didn't make big bowls. I don't want to waste anything. You can always add more flour if you need. And this is my little secret. So I'll sometimes just kind of get my spoon and my hands just a little floury so that cheese doesn't stick on them. And that just kind of makes it easier. It kind of pops off the spoon without getting anything on it and gives you like a little bit of clean hand. It kind of like is like you're dusting flour for your hands. So that's something that's kind of fun that most people don't realize. And all of a sudden you've got like a glob of, you know, the flour, the egg on the bread. I mean, everybody's done that. And you've got like a hand that looks like it's terrible. There's always that like like some Italian grandmother like saying where you only do one hand to bread things. You can't use both because then both hands get messy. But I'm gonna just do a little bit of flour on my goat cheese ball. You guys will see just like that. And then I'm gonna go into my egg. Again, this isn't super complicated. Make sure you get all of it off. And then I just go right into my my breadcrumbs. I'm using panko here. It's what I had. You can certainly use an Italian breadcrumb that's more fine. It's what your preference is and what you have on hand. So you guys will see my beautiful goat cheese ball. So I'm going to continue to ball these. I've got my heat kind of coming up to temperature. I'm going to look for it to be about 365 degrees in order to fry this. Again, most people are not going to have a thermometer, a fry thermometer, just readily available in the kitchen. So I have a cool little tip to show you how you know the oil is ready without having, you know, some infrared gun or a candy thermometer, because very few people have that. But I'll let Steve kind of talk about this wine. I'm going to keep balling and getting my hands a little dirty. So just if you feel like laughing, you know, just look over here at me looking like a crazy person. But let Steve take it away with the wine.
Thank you, Ashton. So this next wine is part of our micro lot series, and this is a 2020 Fiddlesticks Vineyard Pinot Noir. So one of the reasons we created this white label was really for the winemaking team to kind of have an opportunity to explore different terroirs, different vineyards, and just really have fun in the cellar and do some trials and do some different things that we wouldn't necessarily get to do with the other wines. In 2020, I got to work with a few different vineyards in the Santa Rita Hills AVA, which is a part of Santa Barbara County. And this is an area that's really quite well known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And what makes it unique, if you went from Alaska all the way down to Chile, there is one transverse valley that actually doesn't run parallel to the coast, but is the mountain ranges is turned and open to the coast. And that is the Santa Rita Valley. So the marine influence is really pronounced there because it doesn't have to flow up and over mountain ridges to get into the interior valley or up a river. It's really just this open kind of conduit for the marine air to funnel in. And so even quite a ways inland, you've got these really beautiful cold temperatures. And then they have a really nice varied type of soil series in the Santa Rita Hills. So there's a lot of different terroirs to kind of play with. The Fiddlesticks Vineyard was planted in the 1980s, and it's one of the more famous vineyards in that AVA. It's directly across from Sanford and Benedict. And so I had a chance to work with this vineyard, and we picked several different clones of Pinot Noir on early September of that year and produced this wine, which I think will show a lot of this kind of really cool climate, red fruited character in the wine. So you're going to get some nice spice notes, but this lovely sort of raspberry and pomegranate and sort of really red tinged fruits, even red plums. And that's really driven by the climate. The cooler it is for Pinot, the more cherry raspberry it wants to be. When you get a little bit more warmth, then you start to get some of the black fruits, some of that black cherry. And that's usually how I differentiate talking about Los Carneros and our vineyard with other regions is we get both red and black fruits, whereas Russian River Valley, for example, tends to be very dark fruited wines. So this is an opportunity to look at a whole different AVA and the kind of wines that they produce. And I think this is going to go beautifully with these cheese balls.
I love this wine. This is one of my favorites. Not that you want to, I say that about everyone, but this one's really delicious. And I think it'll go really well with the cheese balls as well. I actually really liked this. Thyme was an obvious choice for me when I was thinking about this pairing. I always find that thyme is, it's very versatile, just the same as I feel like Pinot can be when being paired. But I do think that this particular herb is just such a match for Pinot in general.
Yeah, it really works well with the fruit in this wine. Like I said, I'm here in our guest house at the winery, and Dylan is cooking these dishes in the background. And when I walked in, I could just smell the thyme in the air, and I thought, oh man, this is going to go great with the Fiddlesticks.
Question for you, Steve. Can you walk through a little bit of the naming for Fiddlesticks and how that came to be? Because I think it's so interesting and just kind of fun. But
it is
I'd love to hear more.
Very playful name. Yeah. So this vineyard was founded by a woman named Kathy Joseph, who started her own wine brand, and it's called Fiddlehead. And so when she decided to start her own vineyard, she thought the name Fiddlesticks would be an amusing name for the vineyard, given that her brand name was Fiddlehead, and that's where it came from.
Love that. Was it spelled with the X as well?
It is spelled with an X, yeah. So Fiddlesticks, S-T-I-X. It always reminds me of that game, Fiddlesticks.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, right?
We used to say, well, did you just take all of the cuttings from a vineyard and throw them on the ground and play Fiddlesticks? And that's how Now it's really just her having fun with the name of her wine.
Yeah, I love that. You guys, let me show you what I've created over here. So you guys will see I've got my nice little goat cheese balls here. These would also freeze like this, believe it or not. I like to cook them and then freeze them because then you just have to put them in a 200-degree oven just to get warm. But they could also freeze like this. So 2 different options on how to make them like a really elegant appetizer or canapé for when you're having people over. So those are balled up. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 12. So exactly. So 12 to 16, 14, depending on how big you want to make them. Mine are again about a little bit smaller, just a hair smaller than a golf ball. But I've got about, I want to say about an inch up on my high-sided saucepan. I'm using a smaller one. I'm not making dozens and dozens of these. But I've got about an inch of canola oil, vegetable oil, up the side of my pan. And I want to leave ample room because I don't want the oil to overflow on this. I want to create like obviously a safe cooking environment. But the other thing is you just don't need a ton of oil to do this. This is what's known as a shallow fry. It's probably between a shallow and a deep fry, to be honest. Shallow fries can be, you know, a quarter or a half an inch in a pan. But it's just a hair of oil. And I'm choosing a canola oil, a vegetable oil. It's what's known as a neutral oil. So, you know, if you've got an olive oil or an avocado oil, there's going to be obviously a flavor of avocado or olives, you know, just because that is the nature of the oil. A neutral oil that would be a little bit more highbrow perhaps than a canola oil might be a soybean oil, is very popular. You're having a lot of sunflower oils now. Those also work very well. So use what fits and what you have, but you don't need a ton of it. So if you do need to use olive oil because that's what you have, you're not going to like blow through a liter of olive oil trying to do this. But you know, that's just kind of the 2 cents on that. And the reason that you choose something that's neutral is that those oils tend to have what's known as a higher smoke point. So essentially it's the point that the fat starts to burn itself. So butter, for example, has a very, very low smoke point, which is why if you're ever making eggs and the butter starts to kind of brown or blacken, if it gets taken too far, it's because it's got a much lower smoke point, and it just kind of goes up from there. So obviously a neutral oil, because there's not a lot to it, there's not a lot of nutrients to it, it's not a lot of flavor to it necessarily, it has the ability to fry at a higher temperature. And you really want to fry between about 360 and 365 degrees. This is actually the point, and when we talk about fried foods being like good or bad or however you want to describe things, this is actually the point where the oil seals around whatever you're cooking and doesn't infiltrate it. So it actually is what creates that really wonderful fried chicken instead of a greasy fried chicken. You know, if you got a great piece of fried chicken and it comes out of the pot, it should be dry, believe it or not. It shouldn't be greasy to touch. And so that's really why you want that particular temperature. But doing that or creating that at home can be tricky because it's obviously a 5-degree difference and you're up in the 300s. So one of the tricks that I like to use, and I'll just show you really quickly, I don't mind that this is a little dirty because I was using it before for the fondue, but I have a wooden spoon here. And this is something that everybody has at home. And so wood retains moisture, as we know, and water and oil will have that reaction with each other. So because this has a little bit of residual water in it, believe it or not, even this wooden spoon here, when I stick the bottom of the wooden spoon in my pan, it's going to bubble. Oh, you guys will hear that. It's going to bubble around the wood because it's got the water. So that's how you know you're in the right ballpark. And this is actually just a little too hot for me. So I'm going to move it off the heat for just a second. But that's really like just kind of like a quick, you know, easy way to figure out if you're in the right ballpark. So that's just a 411 on that because I know a lot of people don't have them. And so then I'm just going to drop these in. These are going to cook for about 2 to 3 minutes, just until they're golden brown. There's nothing not cooked here. I mean, there's an egg, but eggs cook like, you know, 120 degrees. So I'm going to just drop this right in here, and I'm going to do about 2 to 3, I'll do about 3 or 4. So you're probably going to have to do about 3 batches of these. And the reason I'm not going to crowd the pan is the same thing. I don't want to bring down the temperature of the oil by overcrowding the pan. So you have to work in batches just so that we keep that temperature exactly where we want it.
Ashton, what's been your experience with pairing wines with fried foods?
Oh, I mean, fried foods and wine are great friends. A lot of times fried foods will be paired with bubbles. Just because the salt, you know, a lot of times you guys will see as soon as something comes out of the fryer, you season it with salt. Fried foods tend to be salty. And so what that does is kind of open up your palate, and then the
Right.
same thing with bubbles, and they just kind of marry off of each other and keep you eating and drinking. That seems to be something that's just done a lot. But I also feel like there's room to open that up. I think it has to be a wine that is overall like a lighter wine. It has to have some like playfulness to it. It has to have, it can't be overpowering. If you have a very overpowering wine with fried food, it doesn't live up to the liveliness of a fried food. Fried foods are like light and airy. They tend to be salty, crunchy. So it needs to mimic that in a way as well.
So younger wines are a little bit fresher because they have more dissolved CO2 in them that's left over from the fermentation. And I think that's to, Ashton's point that it's gonna kind of make you just want to salivate a little bit, and it's really gonna open up your palate. And then having the lighter wines, they tend to have a little more acid to them. And so unlike a really big heavy red like a Cabernet or something that's going to be higher pH and a little less acidity, they may not work as well with something like this, but a Pinot or a Chardonnay or a Riesling or something that's very kind of fresh and crisp is gonna work really well. And I think Ashton made a really key point about frying, and that is that you don't want the fried thing to be greasy. You just want that frying to seal in the flavors. So that's where that really, works in a beautiful pairing with the wine.
I tend to also think in terms of, ABV as well. You don't want something with a very high alcohol content to it either, with the fried food. Again, it doesn't really, even just from a balance standpoint, that's not something that, is seen very often. I'm sure it's done, but it's not something that I look to do in a pairing of a fried food. You guys will see. And I'm going to add my last 3, and you guys will see this took all of about 5 minutes to fry these up. And you can obviously do this when people are in the kitchen and enjoying this too. And I'll pull one of these open in a second so you guys can see what the beautiful goat cheese balls look like inside.
Have you ever done this in an air fryer? Like, will the goat cheese fall apart in the air fryer, or is...
I haven't done it in the air fryer. I would say no, because from my experience with frying other things for different clients or for myself in air fryers, it won't. I would say what you want to do is make sure that it's probably at one of the, I don't know. I don't want to answer you and incorrect you and ruin your air fryer, but I would say yes, that it would work, because what an air fryer is essentially doing is it's like a pressure cooker meets a convection oven. And so what it's doing is kind of creating this beautiful seal of very high heat. But I've never done it. I actually don't have one, believe it or not. So I'm going to try it for you, and then I will let you know.
Yeah, I'm amazed what you can cook in it, but I would just imagine maybe the cheese would melt and it wouldn't work out.
I don't know. My mother has one though, so I'm seeing her this weekend. I will ask and report back.
Ashton, were the balls under oil in the pan? Submerged?
Yes, they were. There was like a hair of it over the top that was poking out, but you guys will saw I just used what's known as a spider, and I just kind of like sifted the balls a little bit around there, and then just making sure they were all under there. But I would say like 99% of it was covered with the oil.
Thank you.
Because think about it. I think we did about an inch of oil in the pan, and these are just maybe a hair above an inch. So just about. And I'll just kind of open this up and show you guys kind of what these look like inside, which are like gooey and amazing. Really light. You taste the thyme. Which I think goes really, really well with the Pinot.
Well, my husband was making the fondue while you were cooking, and it came out really well. So.
Oh my God, I love it. Show us it. Do you have it in front of you, or you guys it's in the kitchen?
Well, it's still, it's in the pan. Well, I don't know if you can see it.
No.
That's awesome. I love that. Are you making the goat cheese balls too?
No, we actually made the pork because there was a pork recipe that came through. So we made that earlier.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I had that when I made that and tested it and shot it. I had friends over that night for dinner, and it was a huge hit.
Well, we have the
Good.
cheese balls here too, and the texture of the of the fried cheese is just beautiful. But then when you bite into it, it's nice and cool and fresh, and the thyme really comes through on the palate. So really well done.
I also think the goat cheese is. Oh, sorry to interrupt you. I thought who is chatting?
Oh,
I was just going to ask, how can we get the pork recipe that it was just talked about?
We can send that as well. Absolutely, I'll have.
Yeah,
Jeff
it was
send that
in
as
one
well.
of the emails. We just followed it. We started early because we were hungry with the time difference.
And if you are on Facebook and you join our Facebook group, it's for club members. We also have access to all the recipes there as well.
I was just going to say, what's great about goat cheese in particular too is that so often so many soft cheeses like goat are made locally, so it's a really good reflection of the terroir of the place as well. You'll see sometimes soft cheeses such as goat don't need to go through the same pasteurization process of a hard cheese. So sometimes it allows for more mom and pop purveyors or farmers to create that as well. So you'll see it at farmers markets and at local markets, that I think also is just really beautiful, and kind of wherever you live, there's a version of it, and it'll reflect where you live in and have fun.
delicious.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I think Steve's got some announcements about some fun things that are happening on the property, and some upcoming opportunities to get involved and participate.
Yeah, so many of you know, if you've been following us, that we've been in the throes of remodeling our tasting room and expanding, especially the patio area, so that we have more seating and more outdoor seating. And so we're really, that's just finishing up now, and we're really getting back into the main tasting room and showcasing what we're doing out there. So this past weekend, it did a nice walk through the vineyard. We called it the vineyard in the wintertime, and talked about dormancy and the vines coming out of dormancy and what's happening in the vineyard during this time of the year, and a little bit about what's happening in the cellar, and then followed that up with just a really fun tasting in some black wine glasses, which really kind of confuses your senses because everyone's so visually attuned to tasting wines that that when they can't see the color, they can get tricked by the flavors. That's kind of fun. So what else do we have coming up? We're doing another seminar on March 31st, where it's going to be around the topic of bud break, although bud break will have already happened by then. We're going to talk about what happens in that early part of the growing season, and look at some Rita stemware and do some fun tastings on that evening as well. So that should be real fun. That's from 6 to 8 p.m. on March 31st. And everybody's going to get to take home a nice set of Rita glassware as well. So should be really fun. And if you just follow us on our website or through the club, then you'll get all the information on what's happening at Cuvaison throughout the summer. I know they've been busy planning a lot of events.
Yeah, very exciting. It's been a pleasure to meet you all, to cook with you all, to drink with you all. I've learned some wonderful things. Steve's phenomenal. Thank you for walking us through everything. I hope to meet you guys all again in person. We've got some fun events coming up in the next month, and obviously in the spring and the summer. But it's been a pleasure. We'll make sure that you guys get those recipes so that you have them to enjoy and make your own. But if you guys have any other questions, you can always follow up with us to make sure that we get those answered for you.
Yeah, and Thank you, Ashton. It's been really wonderful. This is our first kind of Zoom event together, and we have more planned in the future. There'll be some live events and some more of this kind of tasting as well. So thank you so much for joining, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the wines as well as the recipes.
We did, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.